The penthouse was less a home and more a mausoleum to his own success. Julian Thorne had curated every inch of the cavernous space with the same ruthless precision he applied to his corporate takeovers. It was a kingdom of polished marble, cold glass, and cavernous silence, perched atop the city like a predator's nest. From this vantage point, the world below was a glittering abstraction, a collection of assets and liabilities he could manipulate at will. He was the king on a throne of chrome and leather, the architect of a tech empire, Aegis Dynamics, that held the digital world in its grasp. And in this sterile kingdom, his wife, Elena, moved like a ghost. 6 months pregnant, her presence should have been a vibrant, life-affirming counterpoint to the apartment's coldness. Instead, she seemed to fade into the background, a beautiful, quiet accessory he had acquired along with the art and the panoramic views. He saw her not as a partner, but as his most elegant possession, proof that a man of his stature could have it all. She was the soft, human element that completed the portrait of his dominance, and he treated her with the same benign neglect he afforded a priceless vase. Beautiful to look at, but ultimately, an object. The chill in their marriage had become a permanent frost over the past few months. It began with the late nights, justified by board meetings that never appeared on any public schedule. It deepened with the thin, brittle excuses that shattered upon the slightest examination. Then came the scent. It was not Elena's warm, familiar sandalwood, but a sharp, aggressive floral, a perfume that spoke of ambition and modernity. It clung to the fibers of his cashmere coats like an accusation, a ghost of another woman's presence in their sterile home. Julian had become a master of dismissal. When Elena, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly, would voice a quiet concern, he would wave it away with a condescending smile. "Don't trouble yourself with business, my love. You have more important things to focus on." He spoke of her pregnancy as if it were a project she was managing on his behalf, another subsidiary of Thorne Incorporated. His focus was entirely on his new star protégé, a brilliant and beautiful young woman named Chloe Vance, whose name was a constant refrain in his conversations. The final, irrevocable break came not with a shout, but with the quiet hum of a forgotten laptop. It was nearly 2 in the morning, the city lights painting cold streaks across the marble floor. Julian was supposedly in a late-night negotiation, but a deep, primal unease had kept Elena from her bed. She found his laptop on the kitchen island, still open. An email chain was on the screen, a conversation between him and Chloe. Her heart began a slow, heavy drum against her ribs. The words blurred into a collage of exquisite cruelty. They weren't just discussing an affair. They were designing a future that did not include her. Chloe had sent him a digital palette of Nursery colors, asking his preference between cloud white and morning mist. Julian had replied, attaching a floor plan of their very own penthouse. The room adjacent to their master suite, the room Elena had spent weeks dreaming about for their child, was labeled Nursery 20. But it was the subject line that stole the air from her lungs. A single, brutal phrase, phase out. It wasn't a love affair. It was a corporate strategy. He was planning to discard her, to replace her like a piece of outdated software, just as soon as she had delivered his heir. The discovery was a physical blow, a white-hot agony that ripped through the placid surface of her life. The world tilted, the polished floors seeming to fall away into a black abyss. For a long moment, Elena stood frozen, her hand instinctively clutching her stomach, a shield for the innocent life within her. The initial shock was a tidal wave of grief, so immense it threatened to drown her. She saw the future he had planned for her, a cliché, the scorned wife, paid off and sent away, a footnote in the grand story of Julian Thorne. She pictured herself weeping in some quiet, lonely house, another one of his discarded assets. The vision was so vivid, so pathetic, that it filled her with a profound and sudden revulsion. She retreated to her study, the one room in the penthouse that was truly hers. It was filled with books, not on fashion or society, but on computational theory and software architecture. Julian never entered this space. He considered her hobby quaint. On the wall hung a single photograph of her grandmother, a woman with eyes that held the hardness of forged steel and the wisdom of generations. Elena looked at that face, a face that had known hardship and had never once bent to it. Then, she felt a gentle flutter from within, a tiny, insistent kick. It was a reminder. This was no longer just about her pride. It was about her child. And in that instant, something inside her shifted. The sorrow did not just recede. It was burned away, incinerated by a sudden, clarifying rage. It was a cold, pure anger, as clean and sharp as a shard of glass. He hadn't just broken a vow. He had assessed her, appraised her, and slated her for decommissioning. He had underestimated her on a scale so profound it was almost mythological. He thought she was a ghost in his machine. He had forgotten she was the one who helped build it. The rage did not make her scream. It made her calm. It settled in her bones, a cold, hard resolve that solidified her spine into a rod of iron. A plan began to form, not of tearful confrontation, but of strategic demolition. He wanted to treat this like a business transaction? So be it. She would orchestrate a hostile takeover of his life. She knew from his calendar that he was taking Chloe to Celeste that night to celebrate the closing of the landmark Apex Corp acquisition. He had told Elena it was a mandatory dinner with the new board. The lie was so casual, so insulting. Elena picked up her phone and made 2 calls. The first was to Amelia, her oldest friend and one of the city's most ruthless divorce attorneys. "I'm ready," was all she said. The second was to the concierge at Celeste, a man whose children's education she had quietly funded through a charity. Reservations were impossible. For her, a table would be waiting. Finally, she went to her closet, bypassing the tasteful, muted colors Julian preferred. She chose a dress of blood-red silk. It was a gown of defiance, a declaration of war. As she slipped it on, the fabric felt cool against her skin, a second skin for the new woman she was becoming. She looked at her reflection, at the swell of her belly beneath the crimson fabric. She was not a victim seeking pity. She was a queen approaching a traitor's court, ready to pass judgment. Celeste was the apex of the city's social pyramid, a restaurant so exclusive it felt less like a public space and more like a private club for the gods of finance and industry. Its walls were glass, offering a breathtaking, godlike view of the sprawling metropolis below. The air was thick with the scent of money and the murmur of powerful people making powerful deals. It was Julian's arena. He sat at the best table, bathed in the soft glow of the starlit ceiling, holding court. He was at the peak of his power, the conquering hero, with his beautiful young prize, Chloe, gazing at him with undisguised adoration. Then, the hushed atmosphere of the room broke. A collective intake of breath, a subtle shift in the gravitational pull of the space. Elena had arrived. The red of her dress was a slash of violence against the restaurant's cool, neutral palette. She did not hurry. Her walk was a slow, regal procession across the marble floor, her hand resting lightly on her pregnant belly. Every eye in the room followed her, this vision of terrible beauty. The power dynamic of the entire room shifted, pivoting to center on her. She was no longer a ghost. She was a reckoning. Julian saw her first. His face, moments before wreathed in a triumphant smile, froze into a mask of disbelief, then darkened with fury. He started to rise as she reached the table, his voice a low, threatening growl. "Elena, what in the hell are you doing here?" She did not look at him. Her gaze settled on Chloe, whose pretty face was a canvas of confusion and fear. Elena offered a small, chilling smile. "I believe you were discussing nursery colors," she said, her voice surprisingly calm, yet carrying an immense authority that cut through the restaurant's ambient noise. "I was never fond of cloud white. It's so transient. Have you considered a warmer palette?" Chloe stammered, speechless. Elena finally turned her eyes to her husband. They were not the soft, loving eyes he was accustomed to. They were chips of ice. "I had a fascinating conversation with Marcus Vance this afternoon," she continued, her tone conversational. "Your chief operating officer. I asked him if the phase-out project was officially on the company books. He was quite confused. He seemed to think it was a new software initiative." Julian's face went white, then mottled with red. He was a cornered animal, disbelief warring with rage. "You have no idea what you're talking about. You're hysterical. You need to leave." Now the command, once so effective, was utterly impotent. He was speaking to a woman who no longer existed. Elena's smile widened, but it held no humor. It was the baring of teeth. She reached for the unopened bottle of expensive Bordeaux, resting in a silver bucket beside the table. It was a 1982 Cheval Blanc, a wine Julian had pontificated on for weeks. "You know, Julian," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper that everyone at the surrounding table strained to hear. "I've always hated this vintage. It's so pretentious. All history, no substance." And then, in a movement that was both graceful and shockingly violent, she upended the bottle. The deep, ruby-red wine glugged out, not in a splash, but in a slow, deliberate torrent. It poured over the pristine white tablecloth, a tide of crimson spreading like a mortal wound, staining the perfect fabric. It bled across the table, soaking into Chloe's cream-colored silk dress and spattering across the front of Julian's immaculate suit. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Shatter. The illusion of civility, of his perfect life, was utterly destroyed in that single, symbolic act. The room was tomb-silent. Julian sat, stunned into immobility, staring at the spreading stain as if it were his own blood. Chloe let out a small, choked sob. Elena placed the empty bottle back on the table with a soft, definitive click. She looked at her husband one last time, her expression now devoid of all emotion. "The locks on the penthouse will be changed by midnight," she stated, the words as cold and hard as diamonds. "My lawyer will be in touch regarding the eviction notice for your assets. All of them." With that, she turned. She did not run. She did not look back. She walked away with the same regal poise with which she had entered, leaving Julian sitting amidst the wreckage of his reputation, the entire world of his peers watching in stunned, silent judgment. He was no longer a king on a throne. He was just a fool in a stained suit. By morning, the incident was the only story that mattered in their rarefied world. It raced through social circles on encrypted texts and hushed phone calls, quickly leaking to the more salacious gossip blogs. Thorne's tablecloth tirade, Billionaire's Bordeaux bloodbath, the narrative he had spent a lifetime meticulously crafting, the image of the untouchable corporate titan, was shattered overnight. He was reframed, recast from visionary to villain, from master of the universe to a common, clumsy cheat. The humiliation was absolute. The fallout was not merely social, it was catastrophic. The board of Apex Corp., the landmark acquisition he had been celebrating, invoked a little-known moral turpitude clause in their contract. The deal, worth billions and set to be the crowning achievement of his career, collapsed. The news hit the market like a shockwave. The stock of Aegis Dynamics, once a pillar of stability, plummeted. In less than 24 hours, the public scandal had wiped out nearly a third of his company's value. But the true betrayal was yet to come. Marcus Vance, Julian's trusted COO and Chloe's older brother, saw his opening. He called an emergency board meeting, his face a mask of solemn concern. He presented the failed acquisition and the stock collapse as irrefutable proof of Julian's instability. He painted a picture of a reckless, emotionally compromised leader whose personal failings now threatened to sink the entire ship. The mistress, Chloe, had been more than just a dalliance. She had been the bait in a meticulously laid trap. Panicked and fearing for their own fortunes, the board voted unanimously. Julian Thorne was suspended indefinitely from the company he had built. Marcus Vance was named interim chief executive officer. The news was delivered to Julian via a sterile email. He was locked out of his office, his corporate accounts frozen, his nameplate already being pried from the door. He tried to go home, to his penthouse kingdom, only to find the locks had indeed been changed. The king was in exile. He retreated to a featureless suite in a five-star hotel that felt more like a prison cell, the silence amplifying the roar of his failure. Stripped of his power, his wife, and his mistress, he was left with nothing but the hollowed-out shell of his own identity. For the first time, without the armor of his wealth and status, he was forced to look at the man he had become. He did not like what he saw. While Julian's world imploded, Elena enacted her strategic retreat. She did not go to a lavish hotel or a country estate. She went to Amelia's apartment, a warm, cluttered space in a historic brownstone that smelled of old books and fresh coffee. It was a sanctuary of authenticity, a world away from the cold marble of the penthouse. Here, surrounded by genuine friendship and quiet strength, she could finally breathe. It was safe. It was real. Here, in the calm after the storm she had unleashed, Elena prepared to deploy her secret weapon. Julian had always seen her as a beautiful intellectual lightweight, her degree in computer science a cute footnote to her primary role as his wife. He had completely forgotten, or perhaps willfully ignored, the truth of their own origin story. He had been a visionary with a brilliant concept for a security algorithm. She had been the prodigy-level programmer who had turned his concept into reality. 10 years ago, in a tiny apartment long before the billions, she had been the architect of Aegis Dynamics' foundational technology, the Orion algorithm. She had written hundreds of thousands of lines of elegant, impenetrable code, a digital fortress that had become the bedrock of his empire. She had done it not for stock options or a title, but for his promise of a quiet life, a life where he would always protect her from the world he so desperately wanted to conquer. The irony was a bitter pill. Now, she would use her creation to protect herself from him. For hidden deep within the labyrinthine code, known only to its creator, was a backdoor, a master key. Elena didn't need to build a new empire from scratch. In a way, she already owned the most valuable part of his. From Amelia's spare bedroom, she booted up a nondescript laptop and slipped through the digital defenses of her own design. She wasn't looking for revenge anymore. That had been settled on the restaurant tablecloth. She was conducting a damage assessment, trying to see how much of their shared legacy could be salvaged for their unborn child. What she found chilled her to the bone. This led her to an impossible choice. Marcus Vance wasn't just staging a coup. He was orchestrating a fire sale. Through her back door, she accessed his encrypted communications and saw the full, horrifying scope of his plan. He was systematically stripping the company of its most valuable assets and preparing to sell the Orion algorithm itself, her life's work, to a hostile foreign competitor known for corporate espionage. He was not just trying to dethrone Julian. He was salting the earth of the entire kingdom. He was going to destroy a legacy that belonged as much to her and her child as it did to Julian. The man who had betrayed her was now a victim of an even greater betrayal. The thought of helping Julian was nauseating, yet the thought of letting Marcus destroy their work was unbearable. With a heavy sigh, she sent a single, encrypted text message to Julian's phone. It contained only a time and the address of a small, unassuming coffee shop downtown. He arrived looking like a ghost of his former self. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, weary brokenness. He sat opposite her, not as a king, but as a supplicant. Without a word, Elena slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was the irrefutable proof of Marcus's treason. The decrypted emails, the wire transfer agreements, the entire conspiracy laid bare. Julian stared at the screen, his face paling. "He was my friend," he whispered, the words hollow. Elena felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a shared sense of loss. "He's betraying the company far more completely than you ever betrayed me," she said, her voice even, devoid of accusation. "He's selling our life's work. I can stop him, but I need you. I can lock him out of the system, but I need your proxy votes to reclaim the board." It was a fragile alliance, a partnership born not of forgiveness, but of necessity. Their war room was not a boardroom, but a small wooden table smelling of roasted coffee beans. The annual shareholder meeting was Marcus Vance's planned coronation. He stood at the podium in the grand ballroom, delivering a triumphant speech about a new era of stable leadership. He was mid-sentence when the ballroom doors opened. Julian Thorne walked in, not with his old swagger, but with a quiet, humbled dignity. He walked to the microphone. "I yield my time," he said simply, to a surprised speaker. All eyes turned as Elena, now heavily pregnant, walked to the stage. A murmur went through the crowd. She did not deliver a speech. She calmly connected her personal laptop to the main projector. The screen flickered to life, showing not a slide presentation, but lines of complex code. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Elena Thorne," she began, her voice clear and steady. 10 years ago, I was the lead architect of the Orion algorithm." She typed a command. A specific line of code glowed. "This is my digital signature, embedded in the foundational kernel since its creation. It proves my authorship." She typed another command. "And this is the administrative kill switch I built into the core protocol. A failsafe against a catastrophic security breach." She looked directly at Marcus, whose face had gone ashen. "Consider your actions a catastrophic breach. As of this moment, your access to the entire Aegis network, and that of your co-conspirators, has been permanently revoked. Chaos erupted, but she wasn't finished. Furthermore, she said, as a new window opened on the screen, here are the fully decrypted communications between Mr. Vance and representatives of Omnicorp, detailing his illegal plan to sell them the Orion source code. The final showdown was not a battle of wills, but a simple presentation of facts. The evidence was irrefutable. Marcus was escorted out by security, his reign over before it had truly begun. In the emergency session that followed, the board, stunned and deeply grateful, reinstated Julian as CEO. His first act, his voice thick with an emotion no one had ever heard from him before, was to nominate Elena Thorne as the new chairwoman of the board. The motion passed unanimously. The new order had been established. The power dynamic was not just inverted, it was reborn. 2 months later, Elena gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Julian was there, in the delivery room, but he was a changed man. The titan of industry was gone, replaced by a quiet, terrified, and utterly awestruck father. When he held his daughter's tiny hand for the first time, he looked at Elena, his eyes filled with a profound, shattering gratitude that was more real than any emotion he had ever felt before. The birth was a symbol, the death of their old, toxic marriage, and the beginning of something new, fragile, and unknown. A year passed. The new normal settled into a quiet rhythm. Elena was a formidable chairwoman, celebrated on the covers of business magazines not as a tycoon's wife, but as a brilliant strategist in her own right. She and her daughter, Lily, lived in a beautiful but warm and lived-in home in the countryside. Julian lived in a modest apartment in the city, the sterile penthouse having been sold. He visited every weekend. The visits were rituals of service. He fixed a loose railing on the porch, assembled a new crib, and read Lily bedtime stories, his voice soft. He was not trying to win Elena back. He was trying to earn his place in their lives, one small, honest act at a time. The silence between them was no longer heavy with accusation. It was comfortable, peaceful. One evening, as he was preparing to leave, he paused at the door. "Elena," he said, turning back to her. "Thank you. Not for saving the company. For saving me from myself." He looked down, then met her eyes again, his own gaze clear and stripped of all pretense. "I know I can never earn your forgiveness for what I did. I just hope that, one day, I can earn your friendship." It was not a grand declaration, but a quiet, humble promise. The promise of a long, difficult road toward redemption. This story teaches us a powerful lesson about the nature of strength and respect. Redemption isn't about getting back what you lost. It is about the grueling process of becoming someone worthy of what you hope to have. True power isn't found in controlling others, but in mastering oneself. Elena's journey shows that the quietest people often possess the deepest reserves of strength, and that a heart pushed to its limit can transform pain not into weakness, but into an unbreakable resolve. Julian learned the hard way that a person is not an asset to be managed, and that true value can never be quantified on a balance sheet. In the end, he lost an empire to gain a soul, and she reclaimed her identity to build a legacy. What do you think of Elena's choice to save the company? Could you ever forgive a betrayal so deep, even for the sake of a shared legacy? If you found this story compelling, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone you think would appreciate it. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories like this. Make sure you turn on all notifications so you never miss an upload. Thank you for watching.